Warning, this podcast typically features spoilers and strong opinions. Proceed with caution. Hello and welcome back to Then a Moment, the podcast where two lifelong storytellers talk about stories. I'm Pavi Prochko, audiobook narrator, writer, actor, singer, etc.
And I am Colin Funk, a childhood development expert and teaching artist.
And today we're going to be talking about Into the Woods. And it's a very special episode because that's actually where the name of the podcast comes from a special
inspired
song. So if you, first 100 people who guess where it's from on our social medias get a sticker from me someday.
Oh, okay.
How about that? Yeah?
Sounds great.
Great. Perfect. I'll buy you all dinner. No promises. But first, we have to do our moment of the week.
Oh, yeah?
What's your story moment of the week?
My story moment of the week is from the marvelous Miss Maisel.
New season's out.
Yes, it is final season, I believe.
Yeah.
And so it's wrapping up, which is fun. But this week, I think it was this week's episode, it was... Oh my goodness, I just lost it.
Character, 3 syllables.
Oh my God. It was, oh yes, it was this week. It was this week. I'm just going to take that over. My moment this week is from the marvelous Miss Maisel.
Great.
In its final season.
Yep.
And that's very exciting. And this week, Midge does something very smart. They get the show she's working for. Oh my God, what's his name?
Yeah, the Gordon.
Yeah,
something Gordon show. Gordon something, whatever his name is. Yeah, the late night guy.
She's working for that show, and they get a new sponsor. It's these diaper rash.
Oh yeah.
People, and they invited
the guy,
Gordon, whatever his name is. Wow, I can't remember his name.
Yeah.
On
Gordon Ford.
Gordon Ford.
Yep.
The Gordon Ford show. They invite Gordon Ford onto their boat with all these diaper rash executives, and he's like, I'm not going to do that. And so Midge had the smart idea that, she's a woman. She has jokes about diapers and motherhood, and she'd be a good replacement for him on the boat. So she goes on the boat, and the set goes really well. They all love her. They want her to be the spokesperson on air. And then she sees one of the executives trying to cozy up to one of the wait staff, and so she butts in and she's like, maybe don't touch things that aren't yours. And to make her point, she grabs his suit jacket, which he left on the side of the boat, and it ends up flying off into the water. Uh-huh. And the executive wasn't very happy and
of course
gets her arrested.
Mm-hmm.
And we skip forward to seeing her with the show's lawyers, and they're talking about all the charges that she's given, and they end up being so ridiculous, the charges. They are, the man accuses her of assault because she had accused him of assault, and he's just being, he's reciprocating.
Yeah.
And that's to be expected, I think.
Sure.
But of course, in the pocket of his jacket was his wallet, so it was also
it was like theft.
It was theft, but even more so because they were on a boat and because it was technically international waters. First of all, France has to weigh in on the legal decision, but also it was technically an act of piracy.
That's so funny.
Which
oh my
is
God.
so ridiculous.
That's so silly.
And everyone is taking it so seriously until I already forgot
Gordon
his
Ford.
name. Gordon Ford
shows
comes
up.
in
Yeah.
and he's like, That's ridiculous. Let them say whatever they want. That's hilarious. Because my first thought was like, that's great PR.
That's really good press.
Hilarious. Yeah. I don't know if it would be back then.
Let them know one of our writers is a pirate. Great.
And I thought it was like really brilliantly done, where I'm like, oh man, back in the day, they were so square. But then they saw the value of that kind of press even back then. It was like a nice little moment. And it was like the tension was broken from then on.
Yeah. Oh, that's funny. What a good moment. Yeah.
I loved it.
I love that when they like switch, when she like drops the jacket and like the very next frame is like she's being like hauled away by the Coast Guard. And she's just like
switch and they hear like before we know what happens, somebody on the boat goes, well, that took a turn. And then they switch to the view of Midge just on the Coast Guard boat, like getting
that's so funny.
Hauled away with her handcuffs. It was very, very funny.
Very funny. Oh my God. That's a good one.
Yeah.
My moment was I've been now taking a course and a mentorship at the writing. The Story Grid. Blah blah. That's my plug for the Story Grid, and we're studying a scene from Jane Eyre.
Oh, cool.
And it's the lovers meet scene, and there's just an interesting moment where. Like how they kind of compress time and expand time in it. Charlotte Bronte, I think, is the author. I think it's Charlotte.
One of the Brontes.
Emily maybe did Wuthering Heights. I don't remember. I think Charlotte's. Yeah. So it's like the first chunk of the chapter is like 4 months compressed in order to like show the tedium, and then as it like expands, it becomes kind of like the action of the story. And it's like an interesting way to think about like how it's just like a compression and then expansion.
Very Frank Lloyd Wright.
Frank Lloyd Wright, yes. But during the scene, there's this interesting moment where she is she's like walking in the snow. She gets like a day off and she's like going to the town, and then she hears in the middle of the night, she's like, it's sundown, it's very, very cold, and she hears like the clip-clopping of hooves, and she's like, oh my God, is that a terrible monster called a guy trash? And maybe it's a terrible monster called a guy trash. And then as she sees it, it's like, oh no, it's not a guy trash, that's a dog, and also a horse, and also there's a man on the horse. So never mind, it's not a guy trash. But it's just, it's an interesting moment for that particular book, because it's like it's considered so real, but there are these like supernatural sort of things in the story, and it's not per se a fantasy, but there's some kind of like unknowable, ungraspable power that seems to kind of create coincidence.
Okay.
And it's like they use this moment to say like, no, spirits are real. It's like actually a real concern. At the very least for this character.
Yes.
Because she's mentioning like, oh my God, is it this weird ghost thing that they've been talking about in the kitchens or whatever? But then she uses like her powers. There's like, it's an interesting mix, because the reality of the moment of the whole scene and of the story is like, can we use our scientific mind and our ability to test things to determine their usefulness and their truth? So that's kind of like a feature of reality, or how you kind of determine the rules, the boundaries around reality.
Right.
What are the things that cause effects? And so she's like using kind of this scientific-ish way of thinking about like, am I in danger right now? Is it a guy trash? No, it's not a guy trash. It looks like more like a dog. And there's a horse, and there's a man on the horse. It's not a guy trash. It's good. And there's this like interesting kind of like series of thoughts that go through, because she's like testing her world. And it was a really interesting like melding of kind of this realism with spirituality. And it just got me thinking about how many stories, or whether all stories kind of have that feature where we have main characters, protagonists especially, testing their world. And when they get the results of their experiment, they determine what is next. Interesting thought.
Yeah.
Getting heady.
Yeah. But that certainly brings up some interesting questions, because I'm like, well, Does that mean, obviously, people believe in supernatural things in reality.
Yep.
So it's interesting to think about like when those supernatural things bring the story into a supernatural place, or how much you can stay with those thoughts and beliefs and keep it realism.
Yeah.
That's, I don't know, something I'll think about.
It's interesting.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Shall we get to it?
Let's do it. Do you want to give us a little breakdown of Into the Woods?
We will, I will do that.
Yeah.
Into the Woods, the musical by Stephen Sondheim.
Yes.
And James Lapine did the script, I think.
That sounds right.
I think so. Once upon a time.
Oh my God.
We start with, I know, yeah. We start with a collection of fairy tales that are really familiar to us. The baker and his wife. We have Jack from Jack and the Beanstalk. We have Cinderella. And there are others. Little Red Riding Hood, etc. And we're going to follow these fairy tales, basically all of these familiar characters that have all of these needs in their lives. They're missing something, as we know, and we know what Cinderella wants, basically, as in the zeitgeist.
Yeah.
We know. I think the baker and the baker's wife is probably a little less known, but they want a baby. We know Little Red Riding Hood wants to get to her grandmother. We know Jack his mother's very poor and he's sent to sell his cow. So we meet all of these characters with kind of like with really clear wants on the surface of the story. And suddenly a witch appears, the neighbor of the baker and his wife.
Yeah.
And she says, you want a baby, but I've cursed you. And so she sends them into the woods in order to break this curse.
Yes.
And everybody else has the reasons to do so as well, but everybody steps into the woods. Literally, they go into the woods. And so
Hence
the name. And that's kind of their entry into kind of like the call to adventure, and they all kind of take it.
Yes, the woods is where all the
mystery, all the adventure
takes
takes place in the woods. And so then we see all the fairy tales that we know play out. We see them intersect in all of these fun ways until they kind of come to a head near the end of Act 1. And we see everything end happily. And we get our nice, happy ending, the one that we know, very fairy tale. And then just as the people around them start to get very comfortable, the fairy tale begins to unravel. And all of the characters need to learn the weight of their choices, perhaps. And as the familiar characters around them actually begin to die in non-fairy tale ways.
Right.
And the whole story kind of collapses. And so they have to do that before they are literally crushed by the consequences of their actions in Act 1.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I think what we really want to hone in on today is the very controversial, even asking this question as like theater folks and as people who have named their podcast based on a lyric from this show, a show that is beloved by many, is, does the show actually work? Is this actually a good show?
Is the story as written, kind of naked by itself, does it work?
Does it work?
Story?
Yeah. And we have more detail about that.
Yeah. So as theater people and as, like we said, people who have named a podcast after it, how familiar were you?
I am very familiar with it. So familiar with it that when I watch other versions of it, there's almost that it's that original production that's on DVD with Bernadette Peters and Chip Zane and all of the other famous ones.
Classic.
So good. Joanna Gleason. Get it. It's really good. And I have them, I've seen it so many times that I have their lines like superimposed like in my ear when
like they're reading of the lines.
Yeah, they're readings of the lines when I'm like at the show or watching the movie or at another production. And we saw two live productions, and we watched the movie again.
Yes.
I just have their line readings like on my mind every time.
Which can,
Yeah, and I think everybody's kind of got their their favorite, and they kind of do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that can obviously, blind us to new choices sometimes and
Yes.
and things like that. But
Of course.
But it becomes this kind of like standard in the back of your head where, as musical theater gets reiterated over and over again, that's the one of the main
features of the art.
of the medium. It is meant to be done more than once.
Yeah.
It is meant to kind of get new life. And I mean, just in one production, every night is going to feel different. It's alive.
Yeah.
It's live. But, with Broadway doing revivals, with theater companies doing it all over the place with different people, it is going to feel different every time you do it.
Yep.
So I think comparison, especially when there's a very popular version that is filmed, it's hard to kind of see other things.
Yes, to break away from it.
But it's nice that original production with Bernadette is done so well that it gives kind of an anchor, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think we'll get more to that.
Yeah.
Because we're going to compare these three. And you're also...
Which three?
Oh,
what are we
these
talking
three
about?
productions that we saw. But how familiar were you with it? You've been in it once, right?
Yes, I was in it. It was technically a concert version, but I've done a version of it. I played Jack back in the day. So I got to, practice learning all the music, and we know Sondheim. It's very precise, pretty complicated music. The classes that I do, the company Stage of Chicago, where I teach babies, we do different musicals every week. We attempted to do Into the Woods.
Oh my God, I remember
1
that.
week on the mat.
Oh my God.
And all we do for those classes, we pick 6 songs from the shows. We do a mini version of the script. It's a very simplified version.
Usually repeating a verse for a song. You're
First
not even
chorus,
doing...
first chorus.
Yeah.
But the way that the songs are written, it's really impossible to do that.
You can't, yeah.
We attempted to do it. We had a week of it, and it was just difficult enough that it was never quite perfect. It felt a little weird on the mat because it was just hard.
It's hard. It never really got quite right.
Right.
Yeah.
Even though it feels like it should, because it's fairy tales and we're doing this for kids, and these are a lot of these songs are very fun, and I think it's possible that a version could have worked. But that being said, I was in it. I've tried to do pieces of it. I've sung songs from it. I've, Giants in the Sky has been in my book forever.
Sure.
And I've, have seen the Bernadette Peters version a handful of times.
Yeah.
As well as, I think my younger sister was in middle school, which was just the first act.
Yeah.
So I saw that way back in the day. Didn't realize there was a second act until college.
That's really common, I think, for a lot of people. Yeah.
Yeah. For people who don't know, the first act is just the fairy tales with a big happy ending. Second act is where it all kind of changes. So for the junior version, they just do act one
because it's complete in itself.
It is.
Yeah.
But yes. So
Cool.
and then coming up to it, we've now seen it since the new year.
Yep.
We've seen it
once at Paramount Theater in Aurora.
In Aurora.
Once we saw the Broadway tour that just came through
At the Nederlander.
at the Nederlander here in Chicago, and then we just
rewatched the movie.
Rewatched the movie. Was that last night or 2 nights ago? I don't remember.
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't
But it was
matter.
last night.
Yeah, we rewatched the movie.
Yes.
And we came upon a few interesting So let's start with maybe
Let's go to Paramount.
Paramount first. We want to go show to show
because I want to. I feel like we had a journey.
Yeah, we did.
In how
we feel about it.
I certainly did.
Yes.
So watching Paramount's version.
Yeah.
it was well done. It had, I would say, like features of it. It like the set was beautiful,
really beautiful looking. Yeah.
Costume design. It was like really stunning. They clearly put a lot of time and effort into, especially the technical elements of it.
Yeah.
The big selling point was Natalie Weiss was the witch, and she is a famous
YouTube vocalist. Yeah.
As well as, she's been on Broadway. She's done other tours. She's very well known in musical theater as well as with
the wider world.
Breaking Down the Riff. That was, pretty popular.
Right.
And then the rest of the cast was a Chicago cast. And we, as
we knew a
former
lot
Chicago
of them.
actors.
Yeah. We had a lot of connections on the stage there.
Yeah, we knew a bunch of people.
A lot of people.
So it was lovely to see those people shine. And
very nice. And I think you're right, the set was, and the design was really, really beautiful.
It was very beautiful.
The stage looked so good.
Absolutely.
The lighting was extraordinary. And, and yet...
And I think after watching that, which I don't think it was, terribly performed. I don't think it was like terribly directed.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of small choices and things that because they didn't land quite right, it had me asking at the end, do I think the show is good?
Right. And it's like if you have this very precise show, and it needs to be done exactly that one way in order for it to work. Is that good? It's like a devised piece, right? It's like it's what Danny and Adam at the Understudy here in Chicago, the theater bookstore, they had mentioned that. But it's like a devised piece trying to like redo it. And I've done that before, and it really sucks. In my acting days, like getting a script from some piece that like some weirdo theater company out in California devised some show, and then you get the script of whatever they created, and it's so specific to them
right.
that it might have worked great, but
again,
now I have to do it.
No, a devised piece is a piece that gets kind of created by a group of people, and the show, you don't write something down and perform it. It's
like organic,
actors
holistic
that are workshopping things and getting things on their feet and making it happen in person.
Yeah,
and it tends to grow out of the people that are doing it.
Right.
The characters are very much from that place, and so it is really hard to recreate those things.
Yeah. So then you have this script that's so specific to the people who were in that original cast, and now you have people trying to kind of make their mark or do their own thing, and in this case it just often doesn't land, and it almost is it's in an effort to make the show really, really beautiful. They like focused all of their efforts there and not so much on actually making it a cohesive show and just trusting that the script will do it. And I posit perhaps that the script on its own doesn't, and you need like a really strong directorial hand.
Yes.
To make sure that everybody's in the same world.
Yeah. And I think something that Chicago is very good at moments, I would say. Very good at small little like pieces of the show.
Yeah.
Of looking at like making things like from moment to moment work.
Yeah.
Like, we're trying to fix this scene. I think Chicago actors are great there. And so they like really lean into
kind of the micro.
Yeah.
And then it like the macro suffers in that case sometimes because there's no one standing back to like look at it from a wider perspective to make sure that it actually like makes sense what's happening.
Yeah, and it might just be a function of, Chicago having less time and money generally, so that we don't give that time to step back and be like, okay, now let's look at it in the big picture.
Yeah.
I think we miss that kind of macro look a lot in Chicago theater.
Yeah, there's something to it's like maybe I think there's a lot of Chicago theater that gets made for the rest of Chicago theater.
Absolutely.
It's so knowing how other actors from Chicago are going to be like criticizing things or not criticizing things. Like there's a lot of like lack of criticism, things that when I look at it, I'm like, well, that should obviously be a critique. And then it kind of doesn't come up. Yeah. And everybody's just patting each other on the back. And that maybe they legitimately do think that, but there's this bent towards not hurting each other's feelings, not being too critical. And because you know that everybody who's coming to see your show is going to be doing that, and everybody who's coming to see your show is going to hone in on those moments.
Yep.
They're like, oh my God, I loved that moment that thing happened. And then I look at it, I'm like, yeah, it's like cool.
Are very good at it.
They're good at bits. They're good at moments. I'm like, yeah, that's a funny moment on its own.
Yeah.
And it makes absolutely no sense in the wider show.
And I think
that doesn't belong there.
I mean, Chicago actors are scrappy. They have to work really hard. They have to do things on their own because, again, the company doesn't have the time and the money.
There's not a whole lot of time or money, yeah.
And so actors are having to bring it all themselves, and it makes sense. It just sometimes, that is just a common...
Yeah, it's a common...
And I think with a show like Into the Woods, moments are obviously very important.
Sure.
It is a
I mean, our whole show is about moments.
Yeah, moments are absolutely important.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why I do find the importance in moments. And I find that the moments really only work, though, if they're informing the rest of it. They have to inform the story at large. Or even the best moments. I think a good moment can actually take you out of the story.
Yeah. Yeah. If it's the only moment that's like that, you know, so you've told the story about that musical workshop you worked on in school, and it's like the best song in the show had to be cut because it didn't make sense.
Yeah.
It's the best song that they made, and they just didn't belong in the show.
Happens all the time.
Happens all the time.
Making shows. You have to cut good things.
And, you know, it's what's a Chanel, you know, take the last thing you put on off. And just take one thing off. Coco Chanel. Take one thing off. Edit. Yeah. You really have to edit. Pare it down. So what specifically worked at Paramount? We said that the set, I thought it sounded beautiful. I thought the orchestra was good and the singing was good.
Yeah. I think it was an especially good highlight of Chicago talent.
The collection of people that they brought in was really top-notch performers, even if they weren't necessarily meshing all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, but like they are very good. I think there are moments that really shined that, you know, kind of get swept under the rug in other productions.
Yeah.
Particularly like The Steward.
The Steward was fantastic.
It was the most fleshed out of the three. I think we saw like that. Yeah. That.
I love The Steward and Jack's mother.
Jack's mother, I think, was maybe my favorite of the three too. In the Paramount production.
Yeah,
she was
absolutely.
Excellent. Because Chicago is the way it is, it allows those kind of like special things to come out where you wouldn't maybe expect them.
Right. And that's, you know, that's like a very Chicago actor thing. Like even when the Les Mis tour came through, it was like Thénardiers were both two Chicago actors. Oh. It's like they like,
and they're brilliant.
I'm sure that they were very good. I know, I've met both of them, and I've seen both of them many times in other things.
Yes,
they're both excellent, and it's like,
and lovely people. That's the other thing. Chicago people are usually very nice.
And it's like they're picked to highlight these roles that are, you know, the Thénardiers are like an exciting role, but I've also seen Les Mis where Thénardiers don't happen that well. Like it's kind of lame.
Sure. But Chicago's a great place to find.
It's like you want a small bit part to shine, you bring a Chicago actor in.
Yes.
Especially if you have a good director and you can like tie it into the world, great. Wonderful.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's a real strength. What didn't work specifically?
Plenty.
I know. And to be fair, it's like we're hesitating here. We know a lot of the people, and
yes.
I think I will be brave and maybe name some names. We'll see. But it just things that didn't work. I don't love. Well, we just said that the design was great.
Design was
However, so much design, and we'll talk a little bit about this about the tour. But it's like all that design actually gets in the way, especially if you don't have a lot of time on it. And again, it's like a timing thing. Maybe it's like you don't have enough time in it, but you not only have to navigate this difficult score and the difficult script, but you also now have to like figure out how to get on this like weird horse puppet or climb up and down this towers, and it just gets in the way, and it fills. It creates empty air on stage, and it slows everything down, and it becomes about that. And then you have to justify things like they had the Cinderella goes to visit her mother's grave, which is a tree. Like she planted a tree where her mother was buried, and
about this too.
And they were like, "Oh, I'm going to go to the tree," and then she went to the tree, but on the set, it's literally a stone tower.
Yes. So there's a stone tower that just like lives on stage, that was living on stage. And
2 of them, actually.
There was 2, yes. Yeah. And the tree was one of the towers?
Yeah. They were like, oh, I'm going to go to the tree. And she goes to the tree, but it's just it's a tower.
And the thing is, there's lots of trees on stage.
Yeah.
So it's confusing.
It's very confusing. And I think they wanted the space because her mother's ghost appears from inside. And so they wanted like the space, but it makes sense why they used the bigger space that they could like make sheer, and she's inside there.
Absolutely.
But also I'm sitting here thinking, why is that stone tower a tree? What's happening?
Or are we supposed to believe that the tree is somewhere else and that we're just it just like it brings up questions.
It does. A similar thing with Rapunzel. We see Rapunzel and she drops down her hair, and
so we see the end of her hair hit the ground.
Because the tower, of course, can't be that high. It's maybe a story and a half up, and so she drops her hair down to the stage, and then upstage, hair comes from
the
ceiling to kind of simulate that she's really, really high up.
Which that one I think could have a quick if there was like a hole in the ground where the hair disappeared into,
that would have worked better.
Fine.
Instead, it just kind of like lay on the ground.
We see the end of
the hair, and then more hair comes. I was like, well, what is happening?
If it went behind something,
and
we didn't see where it went, I could buy it.
But even so, like you don't even have to do that. That's like it complicates it because then you have to have someone actually climb the tower and you climb the hair. It's like we know it's a stage and we know it's a story and we know that it's not that hard to climb up that. And they're like, why? She could just jump down. It actually didn't add anything to have this like stage trick.
So I'm wondering, do we want to kind of jump, especially in terms of set?
Yeah, we can
design,
start jumping
comparing. I know this might be a longer review than normal. Just we have a lot of thoughts. But in comparison, from the Paramount production, the tour was very minimalist.
Yeah.
It wasn't completely minimalist, but the set for the houses in the first scene, literally they flew in 3 different cottages.
Little tiny cottages that floated above their heads.
That just was like, this is where they're sitting in their homes, just in front of these pictures, and they had maybe like a counter and a chair.
Right.
And that was it. That was their whole set for their homes.
Yeah.
Which, again, in comparison, very minimal.
Very minimal and very clear what's going on.
When they go into the woods, then some trees
descend.
Trees come from the sky. And it was clear to me, I think, that it was that they went for kind of an almost thrown together look.
Yeah.
So like the costumes, they didn't look all from the same style.
Yeah.
And the
whole orchestra was on the stage too. So that and they used it as geography. Like you could be far away from someone if you were just on the other side of the orchestra, behind the orchestra, because there was a path that was high above them there. So you could be all the way upstage walking down this path on the other side of the orchestra, and it could represent that distance.
Sure.
And so it was like really useful and not slapdash, but just, I guess, minimal. Really, it's just like it was put together by people who are telling a story.
Yeah.
Not we're simulating some fairy tale world. It's like we're here actually telling you a story.
I mean, I think to me it said, this isn't the important part.
Right.
The actual telling of the story is important, not the actual. You're not like it enhances this idea that it's not about the characters doing what they're doing.
Right.
Not only about that, but about the actual telling of the story itself.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, Into the Woods is a story about storytelling.
Right. Yeah. And so if you have so much set like they did at Paramount, or, you know, say the movie where we move into like a realism mode, or a very vivid, vibrant,
fully fleshed out
then
fantasy world.
Then we're showing that the focus is actually somewhere other than the characters, other than the story that we're telling. And that is to the detriment of the show, I think. And it allows for more room for direction, right? It's like, and I think it shows that the direction could come through for the tour, because it was much cleaner, much faster. I mean, the tempos were fantastic. All of the music tempos, like the songs were just so quick, and it was great. And everybody was tagging onto the end of the previous person's line. It was there's no other pace than rain pace. Rain pace is the only pace. Which is, I think, another thing you'll see in Chicago theaters. Like, people like to revel in their lines. They act between the lines instead of just on the line and say the next. Just say the next one. Just say the next line.
Yes, they're literally trying to squeeze every moment out of a show.
Yeah.
Instead of letting some things just happen and know that it's part of something.
Right. Yeah.
Not every word is the moment.
Yeah.
Not every line is a moment.
Right. Yeah. So now that we're talking about that one, what else worked for the tour?
I thought the way they did the puppets was really good.
Oh my gosh, the puppets were so good.
I mean, in
contrast to the Paramount, there was a Milky White puppet for both.
It was a Milky White. The Paramount had more puppets.
Yeah, they did.
They had a horse.
And more puppeteers. It's a lot of people on the stage.
But then the tour also had
the giant
shoes.
Yes, that was so cool. Oh, that was the coolest thing.
That's something I had never seen before.
And it was they're very I hadn't either. And they were so expressive and minimalist still. Like
the wireframe.
They were just wireframed in the shape of heeled boots. Mm-hmm. So cool. And they really were like, it just brought the danger. It's the giant boots. And it brought the danger of the giant, just like really made it very visceral, brought it into the world. And it's like, as it's running, you're like, oh, that's actually very scary that you know, this puppeteer is like carrying this like giant shoe, but you can use your imagination and see how that is actually like this terrifying giant is running after a little person in the woods. My gosh.
Yes.
It was very cool. And it's kind of in that, I think that minimalism actually allows you to kind of put something over the wireframe yourself.
Absolutely.
Whereas,
I mean, just like you would if you were being read a story.
Yeah.
You would be filling in details yourself.
Right. Yeah.
And you should be able to do a little bit of that, because storytelling, especially oral person-to-person storytelling, is a big element of the show. There is a narrator who is their own character in the stage show, not in the movie.
Mm-hmm. We'll get to that.
But again, that element of kind of different levels of like, what is the story? How is it being told? Mm-hmm. And what does that mean?
Right.
That's kind of that's a big part of the story.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to talk about that a little bit when we get to the movie because I think it breaks down there a little bit. It becomes clear how the breakdown of those three elements, kind of those planes of storytelling.
Sure. I guess like what I'm interested in is after seeing the tour, I was less skeptical about the show itself.
Yeah, same.
And the distinctions for me were in stakes. I think that was a big part of it. If the stakes, especially in the second act, like the first act, I think works really well if it really lives in a fairy tale world.
Yeah, it can be funny, it can be silly, we're having unrealistic things happen.
And it needs to be able to get close to it and feel, if it needs to feel approachable, it needs to feel like that fairy tale
and
thing.
familiar. It needs to feel familiar. We know these
Little Red Riding
stories.
Hood got eaten by a wolf.
And then was cut out of that wolf.
But it's like,
and her grandmother is in there too, and that's silly.
But it's approachable, and they do it in a silly way, and they keep it nice and light.
Yeah.
Again, we'll talk about the movie and how that's different. But then when we get to Act 2, when things become real, then we start to kind of like sever from this fairy tale world and see how that breakdown affects these characters. We need to see the stakes. They're so much higher for these people because they have never experienced even minor choice making, let alone like actual life or death choices.
Right.
In reality.
They are pushed by their fairy tale into doing all of the things because that's kind of how fairy tales don't run on, Joseph Campbell's hero's quest. Like they're a different type of storytelling where agency isn't really a factor. So once you suddenly have to have that and take responsibility for things, what do you do after you just like learn that like, well, all I have to do is make a wish and go do a thing and I get a happy ending.
Yeah.
And that's what you believe and what you know. Now suddenly the world is different.
That's again, big part of the show. And so for it to work on stage, you actually need actors who can deliver.
Yeah.
And I would say in Paramount's production, it was not the case.
No.
And I don't know if it's a directorial problem,
right?
Or whatever, or a time problem. I'm not gonna, I'm not here to blame or shame actors.
All right, hedge monster, hedging.
I just feel bad.
I know, and because it's really having been on stage, I know there's so many things that go into it. There's so much, and it could be an off night, and there's like a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
But when we saw it, I mean, really, The Witch. Natalie Weiss's The Witch just did not do it for me.
No.
At all. It really dragged down the stakes of the whole show because if you don't have, it's like the only person with any real stakes from the beginning through to the end. And if I don't believe it, then I'm like, well, I don't know what the story is then. I don't really get it.
Right. And that, because it didn't feel like they really tended to the witch's stakes, like it wasn't really, it didn't feel like that important to that production, that a lot of moments go by where you're like, okay, but why is that? Why do you, if I'm not sure that the witch is heartbroken when the person she cares about most, spoiler alert, dies.
Yeah.
If I don't believe that she is completely devastated, then it doesn't make any sense to me.
Right. None of it matters. Actually, the whole thing is like, well, why is she singing the song? Why is she gonna like disappear into nothingness or whatever happens to the witch when she sings Last Midnight and turns into a tree or whatever happens?
Each production has
they have their own little version of what happens, but it's like none of it makes sense.
Yeah. When I think they really
in the tour. Oh my God, she was very good. Montego Glover, so
Montego
good.
Glover was excellent.
Yes.
I mean, especially if we're talking about stakes.
Yes.
I mean, also very good at living in kind of a fairy tale world, and then having you like that moment, Rapunzel dying. I feel like I believe there is a moment in the show where it switches.
Yeah.
For me, I think that makes sense. But I think each character kind of has a different place where it lands for them.
It's like the time they become an adult.
Yeah.
Childhood ends.
And I think when Rapunzel dies, that's
when the witches like,
and the shift that happens in that character.
oh, it's really heartbreaking.
Brilliant.
Yeah, really good.
Really brilliantly performed.
Yeah.
And directed.
Excellent.
But
yeah. And I think another, to the point that really the show actually might work. I was more confident as well that the show works after seeing the tour, because there were more choices that were different, because I've seen it a few times. And anytime someone does something other than what the original cast did, I'm like, well, see, the joke didn't land. It didn't land. That was a joke and you missed it, and it didn't land because you wanted to do something else. And there's a valiant effort, but it didn't work. But this is the production that I've seen the most choices that I've never seen before. And like
in the tour, you mean?
in the tour. And it's like the kudos go to really Gavin Creel was like the star for me in that sense. It was like I had never seen that before. Interesting.
In specifically
as the wolf and as the prince.
Okay.
That I was like, I've actually never seen those choices. That's really unique how this is coming out.
Sure. And you know, he was that character in the revival, and now is
the original
touring
revival.
with it.
Now he's
So
touring with it. Yeah.
It's unclear because he kind of was there for those choices. It's unclear if it's like because of him or because of a director's choice. But
Sure.
either way,
it was really, he's very good.
yeah, he's very good.
I think initially when I had heard that he's Cinderella's prince, I don't know why, but I was so skeptical of it that I was like, Cinderella's prince? That's weird. He should be Rapunzel's prince. I don't know. I just always imagined, I don't know, especially because he was opposite Joshua Henry, and there's something about
yes,
well, he's supposed to have like this big bassy voice, and Joshua Henry is like this much like deeper voiced person.
That'd have been fun to see. I would have.
I know that would have loved to see that pairing around. It'd be so fun. But then I saw it and I was like, oh no, I'm convinced. Actually,
No,
I loved
excellent.
Gavin Creel.
Yeah,
I thought he was so funny. He was good. Yeah.
And really, the only time that I've seen it where the big revelation I had.
Yes.
That I thought really maybe was part of why I think I kind of shifted in my like, oh, maybe this does work.
Yeah.
Is that there were things that I saw in this production, and partially because
the tour, of course. Yeah.
In the tour.
Yeah.
Partially because of the way Gavin Creel played both the wolf and the prince.
Right. That's a normal double casting, but
normal double casting. I never thought anything about the double casting.
I didn't understand why it was actually in the past. I'd never gotten it.
And I'm not sure if it's intentional, but after seeing it this time, I'm like, I think it's very clearly intentional that they're doubled. It's the first time I've ever noticed that the Little Red Riding Hood and wolf scene parallels the moments in the woods scene.
Yeah, with the prince and the baker's wife.
Yeah, it's the first time that I realized that they're on their path. They get distracted and tempted away from it, and they both have deadly consequences, of course.
Yes.
In Little Red's case,
it's
still
a fairy
in the fairy
tale
tale world.
So she gets eaten, but she gets saved.
She gets saved. I mean, to get eaten and then that's silly.
It's right. It's silly, but it's deadly consequences.
But it is deadly.
Yeah.
And then the same thing happens to the baker's wife,
Yeah.
but it's now in this real world.
Mm-hmm.
And, Little Red is a child and the baker's wife is a woman and a mother. And there's something very poignant about seeing the shift.
It's like the real parallel, the real mirror scenes that it's like I think you pointed it out that it's like even how they had staged it, where the prince actually literally distracts the baker's wife from her path, and she's counting steps as she's like trying to stay focused on the steps, and she's counting.
The way they blocked it, where that first interaction, she's like, "Hey, great, yeah, nice to see you." When she's just like on her way, she's focused,
really
she's doing
focused,
a thing.
yeah, blinders on, and then he's like, "Hey, come on, look over here. What are you doing in the woods alone?" And he literally distracts her.
Yes.
And in the same way that, the wolf does to Little Red Riding Hood. Oh,
yeah.
Where are you going? Come pick some flowers for your grandma. It's okay. It's fine.
Yeah. I think the way that show works is if we see a very clear shift from what we see in the first act to the second act in terms of that, like that moment where we realize we're not in a fairy tale anymore. We have to deal with this thing. And then because we're exploring what storytelling is doing and how it's affecting them, and how the information in the stories, how that can be helpful and hurtful in the real world.
Right. Yeah.
And that only really becomes clear when those things, where we both see a distinction, but also the parallels.
Right. Yeah. We see how, they are different. I mean, that's the full lesson, right? It's like, in the fairy tale world, we get, there's no consequences, but actually there often are bad ones. Yeah. I think, when would you say the moment is that it actually makes a switch?
I think the moment is where they turn on that narrator.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say too, that it's like in the stage play, if you haven't seen it, the narrator also plays the mysterious man who happens to be the baker's father. If you've only seen the movie, that's not going to make any sense to you. But
yeah, and
that's a huge complaint. But the narrator about, a quarter of the way into Act 2 gets sacrificed to this new giant that's come down to like take revenge because her husband was killed by Jack. And when they turn on him, and it's literally like he's been, inside and outside the play as he's double cast. But now there's no more mysterious man because by the end of Act 1 he's dead. So the storyteller's his only job is to tell the story, and then they all turn on him. The whole time they haven't paid attention to him.
Yeah, they don't acknowledge him the rest of the show.
And here at this point, he's talking about how like, these are people who aren't used to actually making choices, and he's kind of describing it, and then they all notice him, and suddenly the worlds merge. And it's like literally the worlds merge.
Yes.
Where the storyteller actually gets dragged into the story and then killed, and now they're completely untethered. And it's the first like honest to goodness death, I believe. Like we don't actually get to see, we do talk about a dead giant, but it's a giant. That's not a real person. We do have a wolf, and the wolf is killed, but it's not a real wolf. It's like the people that are killed are not people.
Right. No, I mean, I think it's very, very clear.
Yeah. Until the mysterious man dies of natural causes or stress, or maybe he was a spirit the whole time because they keep calling him a spirit. So it's like unclear. There's this vagueness about like all of the people that actually die are unpersoned. They're we can palate it.
That is, and it's even brought up later when they realize how like.
Well, isn't the giant a person too?
Well, a wolf isn't a person. Ask a
wolf's mother.
There's some like
there's some really poignant lines like that. Yeah,
they do. I mean, like it's kind of spelled out.
Yeah,
the way it's
supposed
to work.
Right.
We need to see this thing and meant to feel like, yeah, that's a giant. He died. Yeah, that's a wolf. He ate. He died.
Yeah.
And then
now we're
asking the hard questions at the end.
Yeah.
We see Stuart's death.
We see the storyteller's death. We see the steward kill Jack's mother. We see Rapunzel get crushed. We see, the royal family, you don't see them die, but like we assume that they have. They kind of get set upon as they leave, as they escape.
They come back in the little ghost interlude.
Yeah, and the little at the end, and they're like, we didn't make it. But that's real. That I think that's the real turn there. And I want to discuss this because I think it's really interesting, a little bit more from my story grid training, but a really interesting kind of framing of storytelling where you have on the surface, like the things that literally the characters do, above the surface being how the story is communicated.
Like the lens to,
and that has to do with like the medium, the the mode of storytelling. Like in this case, it's on stage, it's a theater show, and also we have a storyteller that's narrating it, and so there's all those parts of the actual storytelling, how it gets communicated to people.
Right.
And then beyond the surface is kind of what is the really universal human ideal virtue, desire, whatever that is being kind of like tugged at there. And you have kind of these three levels all the time in stories. And this is very interesting because at the moment that the narrator gets dragged in, we actually kind of have a collapse of the border between on the surface and above the surface.
Right.
And that totally collapses, and we have this new world. And it's, I think, a requirement of this story. You need that, otherwise the story doesn't make any sense at all, which brings us to the movie.
Well, before we get to the movie, real quick. Can we look at the musical as it is and say what we think works and what we think doesn't?
Yeah.
Because
the musical as it is. Sure.
Yeah. I think, like we said, it is a really interesting. There are some brilliant moments, but it's like the idea is really brilliant. The idea of a show that is about storytelling, and it does things like smush these planes of existence together to actually force us to think about the storytelling and its impact on the world,
on the wider world.
I think that is very interesting, and they do it well.
Yeah. It's actually, children will listen. Careful the tale you tell, that is the spell.
Yeah, they do a great job of showing realities through different lenses.
Yeah.
Because there are pieces of fairy tales that are real, that really get to real ideas. That's the whole point of fairy tales. Right. They're really getting to real ideas. And sometimes in the real world, we forget about the importance of those things. Yeah. And then on the flip side,
the world is not a fairy tale.
The world is not a fairy tale.
Yeah.
So it doesn't make a judgment on like fairy tales good, bad.
Right.
It just shows this kind of the spectrum of the lessons that you can take out of it, the ways that stories can be used that could be positive or negative.
Right.
But in the end, stories are powerful.
Right.
And they make a difference, especially with children.
Yeah. The words that you use they listen. I mean, it's very brilliant. The parallels of children won't listen. When Rapunzel dies, the witch sings children won't listen. Mm-hmm. And in the tour, just the most brilliant moment when she walks up to the baker's wife who's holding her baby, and she starts to sing the baby. No matter what you do, no matter what you say, children won't listen. And it's just it's really very striking. It's really an emotional moment because she has just watched her daughter die. And the way that was performed was brilliant. It's like this really visceral, real.
Sweet and intimate and real. It was.
And then she comes up and sings to this baby about how children will, and this new mother about how.
My God.
It's a warning.
It's a warning to this mother.
Yeah.
That. Be careful. Children are not.
It's going to happen to you too.
And that's really brilliant because children often
they don't
obey. They don't listen to what you're saying because language has many meanings.
Sure, it does. But then brilliantly also later on at the end of the show, the witch comes back as ghost or whatever they do, and she sings "Children will listen." And it's careful the spell you cast, children will listen. Careful the tale you tell, that is the spell. And it's your words actually do matter because the children are actually always listening.
Always listening.
They don't listen, and they also are always listening.
And it's brilliant because both of those things are true.
Yeah. They're not mutually exclusive at all.
Crazy.
And there's a really brilliant
love
moment in the show that you pointed out that it like really codifies that in that one moment where they're waiting to slay the new giant after everybody's already died, and the baker's wife is dead, and the baker is with Jack up in the tree, and they're waiting for their opportunity. And Jack finds out that his mother's been killed, and he says, "Oh, well, after we slay the giant, I'm going to slay the steward who killed my mother." "No, don't do that." "Well, wasn't it wrong?" "Yes, it was wrong." "Well, then I should do that." He's like, "No, don't do it." "Well, I'm going to kill him." He says, Fine, then kill him." "No, don't." Where he changes his mind there, because it's a moment that he takes back the thing that he said, because actually this can be really formative for Jack.
Yep.
I actually have to be very careful about what I say right now to Jack.
Which is, it's crazy because in communicating, fine, do it, the sarcasm is meant to communicate like, I still don't think you should do it.
Right. But he actually has to be careful because the words
are important.
matter. Yeah.
Yep.
And it's I think the story in that, just that whole kind of philosophical vein of the story is really brilliant, and it's very moving to me. All of the really very real, they really packed a lot into this show, which actually,
yes, they did.
Maybe if you're ready, it brings me to like what doesn't work.
I am ready. Yes. Yes, I think that it's a good segue, because I think, as Sondheim tends to do, over writes and over
shots fired.
And,
yeah, he does. It's a little bit overpacked, and it's overwritten.
Absolutely.
And
it's just a little too long. They can cut out a couple of the songs without any problem.
That's true.
I'm sure there was editing.
Yeah. I mean, I can't even imagine how long that show was. But like No More could just be gone. Yeah, I don't need No More ever.
Speaking of the only thing that the movie does better than the show, I think that's the only thing the movie did. And I'm like, that's it. That's yes. Cut that, because that little scene is enough.
Yeah, this little scene, this little scene between the baker and his father is all you need. You don't actually need this stupid song, because then you've got three really slow ballads in a row. And I'm like, oh my God, this is so
No One Is
long.
Alone could be half as long.
Probably could be. I do love that song, but it probably could be shorter. It gets broken up, and it's a lot.
And then they have a reprise of it later.
Oh, yeah, they do.
Like, it's 100 years long at the end.
Yeah.
And everything's just slow in, what's supposed to be like the most exciting part
everything screeches to a halt, and then, yay, we kill the giant. Like, that's how it happens on stage.
Yeah. It's
really a long time thinking.
That's the biggest... I have a problem with that storytelling in the show. As a live show, it just feels dead at the end.
Because it's moves, last midnight, and then it's just...
midnight feels like...
It's the last moment, and then it's just suddenly the long night of the soul. The dark night of the soul is just like a half hour long. And then we kill the giant, and in just like a line.
Yeah.
Oh, look. It's like it's all like narrated. Oh, it's very silly.
Yeah.
And so,
and I think... they get all of the messaging they want in.
Yeah.
I think that is, a double-edged sword there, because they say a lot of words. They get a lot of messages across. But I find the end of the show lacking.
It's a real slog.
Probably another unpopular opinion is I don't think the Witches song, the rap, the Greens rap, I think that could be cut out.
Yeah.
I don't need it. I don't need it at all.
Yeah.
I think it sounds silly, and it's not.
It's like, a little dorky.
But it doesn't feel fun and silly in a fairy tale way.
It's just...
it feels like
someone being clever. Someone's being clever
and trying to do a thing.
My rampion, my champion.
You should see my tangerines.
Well, you should see my tangerines.
No, not into it.
No, I know. It's very silly. Yeah. I think too, part of it is the overwrittenness of the show. I talked about this also with Danny and Adam. Hey, Danny and Adam, I hope you're watching. Shout out. Maybe we'll have you on the show someday. But they were talking about how like they loved the music direction, and well, it's just that the script is like music is kind of what I had pointed out, where it's like part of it's like going back to why it usually doesn't work if you don't do it exactly how they did it in the original, is because it's so written and it's so precise that you actually have to play those notes in that rhythm, otherwise you're not playing the song.
Yeah.
And there's whatever variation you can find in there is good. People do it all the time. That's how music works.
Plenty of variation.
But if you don't play those notes in that rhythm, you're not actually playing the song.
Yes.
And that applies to the story on a grand scale. It applies to the individual lines between the people and how they're said. It's like they're very specific jokes, specific, and not just jokes, but like jokes and whatever the dramatic equivalent would be. You know, it's like the timing is precise.
A moment.
Yeah, a moment. Every moment is precise.
Yeah.
And so it's to the detriment of the show. It's hard to do.
Yes.
Yeah.
It is. It's hard to do. I think that is ultimately to its detriment.
Yeah.
It's just difficult. It's difficult to do well.
Going? We should probably get to the movie.
Yeah. We can do that.
Yeah. Bad. It's not great.
No, I don't love the movie. Okay,
I liked it.
What's good first?
Okay, good. I think it looks nice. I think this time around, I saw it a long time ago, and I remember having particular criticisms about it. Criticisms. This time, I actually enjoyed the individual performances more this time than I had before. Sure. I was thinking like, why did I hate them so much? I don't know why. Other than James Corden, I think he's awful. Sorry, James. If I ever get famous, I'll apologize to your face. But I just think you're just the worst in that film. I hate it.
Yeah, I don't think. No, I just don't.
I just did not buy it at all.
And we usually are pretty. Actors are great, and there's lots of extenuating circumstances.
I understand all of that.
I just don't think it worked.
I
thought the casting was great.
I thought the casting was great. I mean, Emily Blunt is fantastic. I really
awesome.
like.
I mean, vocally too.
Great. That was the thing. I was so surprised. I was like, why did I think everybody couldn't sing in that movie? Everybody did great. Everyone sounded great. I really thought it sounded really good.
Yeah, even James Corden didn't sound bad.
Vocally
it was totally fine.
No, vocally is fine.
I had no problems vocally actually this time, and I remember having problems. And part of
maybe
it
they changed it. Maybe they remastered it or something. I don't know.
Because some of at the beginning, I did notice a lot of I really hate. Movies just need to get it together. I don't know what it is, but like switching from talking to singing still sounds so weird.
It sounds so stupid. It's all auto-tuned and sounds bad.
Why does it sound so bad?
I don't know. I don't know, because they did it in a studio and then they're trying to
They live sang for that one.
They did?
Yeah, but the live singing one sounded weird too, I think.
Oh, weird.
Wasn't that one live sung?
I know the Les Mis was. I don't know about Into the Woods.
I thought it was, but I might be wrong. That is very possible.
Yeah,
but my understanding was that they live sung.
Interesting. We'll have to look that up. Was it live sung? Was Into the Woods movie... Was Into the Woods the movie live sung? ? She doesn't want to ask. Into the Wigs. That's a good drag show name. Into the Wigs. Into the Woods movie sung live.
Singing live to a camera on set.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Well, then they mixed it bad. What the hell? That's really disappointing. Because that would be...
Yeah, they sung live.
I'm more impressed even now. That's great.
They sounded
I thought
great.
they did great.
I think it is easy as a musical theater person to get very hard on people.
Yeah.
Because it's like, well, I can sing better than that, and I don't get cast in it. That's a very common thing.
Yes.
I do. I get it, and I appreciate the.
And I'm sure that's where I was, when I saw it 10 years ago, whenever that came out.
And I still
2015.
think like I would prefer a musical theater actor to be cast.
Yeah.
Even in the movie version.
Sure.
As long as they're also good at film acting.
Yeah. You don't want someone who
Because
can't
I also
do it. But
would like the best singers too.
yes. Yeah.
I would like the best of it all.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I don't think there was any real criticism.
For the performances,
There's
I
like
thought
a little bit. I noticed a couple times. I'm like, I clearly tell they don't have a lot of practice acting while they're singing.
Oh yeah,
Just a tiny
bit. Just a tiny bit, but it wasn't that
Mostly it was
noticeable, but it was fine. And I also think you pointed out that the a lot of Sondheim is like very movie friendly. The songs,
Well, especially this.
it's like
Yes, because a lot happens there's a lot of words and you're supposed to get a lot from it. So it would
just
work really
works
well.
really well with
if
a
we're up
close-up
close.
camera, and they really executed that really well with Emily Blunt in most of Moments of the Woods, and they did it really well in Stay With Me
really
with
well in
Meryl
Stay With
Streep,
Me.
where it's just like it's almost entirely just like her head is the only thing on the screen, and it's so good.
She kills it too. Vocally, acting. I mean, that's
and it's like a stark contrast with a lot of other movie musicals.
Yes.
That's like,
that's that's the new thing.
The new thing is
just
to
like
just pack it with
not
movement.
a song where like we can watch one person just stand there and sing a song.
Like in the Heights,
around.
or is that the Breathe song from In the Heights, when it's like, I actually want to watch her sing that really beautiful song, and instead it's just like,
They montage.
they just montage through it, and there's all this movement. And with the new West Side Story movie with Something's Coming, he's like dances the whole. He's like just stands still, like in the original movie. He's just like basically he's on the street, and you just watch him sing.
Yeah.
He might move a little bit, but he doesn't. Not
You
really.
trust your actors to act.
Trust your actor to act. You don't have to like make it a whole thing.
Yeah.
Because the song is the thing. The song is the thing. It's a musical.
Okay, but we're talking about the things that
Anyway,
worked.
things that worked. That worked really well.
I liked that they didn't make the princes too cartoony.
Yeah.
There was still like they were ridiculous, but also in this very like intense,
Yeah.
like charming and attractive way.
Yeah.
And I think when I see it on stage, often they make them like very over the top and goofy. Paramount certainly took that to the extreme.
Oh man, that really
to
was
the detriment,
that really
and I
hurt
did
everything.
Not love the choices they made with the princes.
That was really terrible. They made them weirdly gay, and I just with each other and their brothers, and I don't know what
was
was
like for a
happening.
joke.
It was just a joke. It was just a joke. And the whole woods, they kept saying woods. Oh man.
Well, then he has this whole song where he has to sing it
He's have
100
to
times.
yeah.
And he says
anything
woods
can happen
when it's
in the
supposed to be
woods.
serious.
That's the serious part
There
of the
shouldn't
show.
be laughs every 5 seconds.
No. Oh man, that was a real travesty. I really was upset by that, and I think the movie did that much better.
Yeah, I thought the tour generally was great at balancing it.
Yeah.
It was goofier,
Yeah,
but you still got to see that they have to be charming.
they have to be
just do.
charming. Yes, they have to. They have to be likable.
But I like that in the film that it's almost a surprise in Agony that they're kind of goobs.
Yeah, they
You're
are.
like,
yeah,
Oh,
it's like they're like very put together, very like. I mean, in the movie, they kind of like did make Rapunzel's prince kind of like fall all the time. He was like doing
That
all
was
these
confusing.
prat falls.
I
It
didn't
was
like
so
that.
strange.
well, it just didn't read as like, I'm like, wait a minute, is that him being,
Did she notice him? Did the witch see
was this
the
it felt
prince?
like a plot point
Yeah.
and not like a character choice.
Right, and then it ended up just being a character. It just was very
was very
unclear.
strange.
But if they at the very least, if you just like take out, they're very serious in the song, or as they're like talking to each other, and then they become like just.
But they're very
dorks.
serious in the song.
They're very serious. It's very
Which
like the school of B.
brings-
Arthur, right? The school of
it becomes comedic because
B. Arthur School of
you
Comedy.
start listening to them and being like,
Oh, you're
a minute,
weirdos.
what?
You guys are so silly.
oh, that's actually ridiculous.
yeah, you're very, very. You're goobers. You're just goobers.
And like we said, cutting out.
Yeah, cutting out no more was
No
good. Oh, there was one more thing. I mean, Christine Baranski. Christine Baranski's wonderful.
Oh,
and she
she's
plays
so good.
Cinderella's
I love
mother,
her.
and she's so good. Yeah, those things worked for me.
Yeah.
What didn't work?
Everything
So
else.
much. I know. Any line changes that didn't need to happen. Removing the narrator. It's like a list of sins. Removing the narrator.
Removing the narrator and replacing narration with the baker narrating.
Very strange.
It doesn't make sense to me.
No, you kind of like, and you pointed out, it's like you're not making any choice.
You've not made the choice to
Remove the narrator.
make it real and have no narrator, but you're not like committing to having a narrator.
Right.
Which is like this iconic
That's the
part
whole
of the show
thing about the show.
where the narrator gets sucked in
And so then you don't have that collapse of on the surface and above the surface, which means you don't really have a story other than what is on the surface. And is there a story in Into the Woods that way? Because now we have the whole first act, and they, of course, didn't split it up in acts, but like the first act, as is traditionally considered in the musical, is so serious. There is not a single laugh to be had, except for apparently Rapunzel's prince's pratfalls, which is so stupid.
which I kept being like, wait a minute, was that supposed to be a joke? I don't know.
Right, I don't know, because it's so unfunny. The whole thing is unfunny, and we're not in a fairy tale. It's like they've brought fairy tales into Westeros.
Oh my God.
It's like it's so serious.
It's very serious.
It's so dark. It's serious.
Like, I don't mind it being like a high fantasy, and then we're like, give me some really stylized.
Yeah, let it be stylized.
And like, if you're going that route, it has to be more versus like less in the realism. There has to be a shift.
Yeah.
From that beginning part
into the end.
Into the end.
Because
That's
now it just
all.
was one big long story, and it actually got like weirdly calmer in the second act when everybody's
strange.
supposed to be in danger, and they're supposed to be like, it's their first time being exposed to this kind of danger. We said,
Also, Rapunzel doesn't die.
and Rapunzel doesn't die. And so then
there's
the
no-
stakes for the witch go away. So there's no reason for the witch.
Gone.
Yeah. Oh my God, she's left me. But yeah, but she's still alive. Like, she has to die. Like, the thing you love most in the world has to die in order for it to make sense
Yes.
that you sing Last Midnight and then run away.
Yeah, so we don't get the stakes. We don't get this like very clear shift. We don't get this moment where the outer world becomes part of the inner world. We're missing these big things that make
The show,
the stage show so good, but also like that's what the story is.
That is the story. Right. And so that's the thing, that it's like, it's not just, well, that's what makes the show good. It's not like being like, well, they did Phantom of the Opera and didn't do a big chandelier. Yeah, but you still would have the story. The story is, the Phantom of the Opera is not the chandelier. It's extraordinary, but it's not the chandelier. In this, the story is actually that there's a storyteller, a narrator, who gets consumed by the story, and the
Yeah.
story collapses.
the
The storybook falls apart. That's the story, and they didn't do that story.
The story is fairy tale world collapses when you collide it with the real world.
Yes.
They do not play well together.
Right.
And they are at odds. Even with the parallels, they really fight each other. And I think that is the exploration that the
Yes.
show is all about. And
Yes.
we don't do any of it in the movie.
There's none, zero. Just really atrocious.
And there's like
travesty.
ways that they could have used film techniques to do it.
Yes, and there were some moments that they did that were really
did.
interesting, like with I Know Things Now, and she's like falling down the gullet of the wolf. It was
Yes.
like very stylized.
That's
but
really the only time where we see this like fairy tale world come out. That's the only time
it's
in
the
the
only
whole
time. It's like what we want.
movie.
What I want is Pleasantville. I want the
Yes.
whole first half of the show
Wizard
to
of
be
Oz.
Wizard of Oz. It's in black and white, or it's in color, and it goes to black and white. Or
I mean, that's
you get
a very
it.
obvious.
But that would have been
But
clearer.
in both of those movies, how effective is that switch?
I think the Pleasantville switch is actually even more poignant because
love
it's
it.
like
I think it's so good.
where actually you have these real people that have like fallen into the TV land world, right? And it's like these characters are avatars and archetypes, but they're not real people yet. They haven't actually actualized. They've not self-actualized. And so then you suddenly, what happens when you have these, it's not like, well, what if Jack was a real person? That's not even what this story is. It's not what if these fairy tales became real. It's what if these people from the fairy tale These avatars were confronted with reality.
Right.
And they're completely unequipped to do so. Because we're not going to imply, we're not going to infer these human traits and I'm assuming that I have a backstory and I'm assuming they've developed like any human. They haven't. They're fairy tales.
Okay, because what's important is I think, because of my lens, is that it really is about children.
Yep.
And we're seeing the stories and the things and the ideas and the world that children live in, and how when they get to the real world with all of these heavy things, with this trauma, I mean, there's trauma all over this story. Once they get into the real world, how some of those fairy tales are not serving them, and some of them are.
Yeah.
So we are looking, I mean, it's a story about development. I believe.
Absolutely. So, it's a story about childhood development. It's like that is the.
You have to see the story from a child's perspective at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
You have to feel like you're seeing this happy, shiny, pretty fairy tale that a child would see.
Yeah.
That's why Act 1 is a child's show.
Right. Yeah.
And how we have children being played by adults most of the time.
Sure.
In the movie, played by children, which is, I think, fair for the movie to do.
Sure.
Because I think they can get away with that, because we get to see impact on children. I think that's
actually really
something
interesting.
that the movie does that I thought was interesting.
Yeah.
But I think, I mean, again, Sondheim is telling you his messages. I mean, he's literally spelling out for you. The last song in the show is Children Will Listen.
Yeah.
That's the last song.
Right.
It's about how stories affect children.
Yeah.
In the end, I believe that that's what the show is
the
about.
Stories that they're told, the stories they tell about themselves, the stories they are told about themselves.
Mm-hmm.
It's all, that all factors in.
Yes.
And then they didn't do any of it in the movie. They didn't do not a bit.
It's a bummer.
It's a real bummer.
Just little moments.
Yeah.
Little moments they did okay. But
all right. Superlatives.
So overall,
it's gonna be the show. Okay, so Oscar moment.
You know what? I want to give it to Dakota Hughes. Can I do that?
Yeah.
I meant to mention their name at the beginning of. We mentioned the steward in the Paramount
production. Best part of the show.
I thought was a very special take on the steward.
I loved it,
and was very I always think the steward is very important to the show. It's a great foil for some of the characters, and that it just highlights a couple of the messages really well.
Yeah.
And that it's they're just kind of going about their business, but they're kind of the straight man, but not there's still, there's a lot of cool ethical questions in that.
Yeah.
And to have that part really live and breathe and feel very special.
Yeah. That was very cool.
I thought it was really nice.
Yeah.
And I thought Dakota did a great job.
I think I agree with you. Yeah. I think I would give, I think I'd probably give it to the puppetry.
Oh, I was gonna.
Yeah, I think in the tour. And it was in stark contrast. I think there was an interesting point, and I'd be curious what you have to say about this. But Danny and Adam again made a point that they don't like when there's a puppet milky white.
Okay.
And
what do they prefer? Because I know there's a few different ways.
In the original, it's just that model. It's like that.
It's just a
still thing. That doesn't have life, and
which I think that's.
And they made an interesting point
fair.
Because it allows the audience to. It's like a blank slate for you to fill in the blanks.
Absolutely,
and
makes sense.
And if it's a puppeteer that gives the cow personality and life, then it makes us really sympathetic to Jack. And it makes Jack's mother look really, really mean. Instead of showing us a milky white,
appropriate
it could be
for the child
their
perspective. But yes.
and their take would be, well, it can actually serve Jack's innocence if it's like, well, we're just seeing like this generic cow, and he's like, this is my best friend.
Yeah.
It is the most beautiful, wonderful cow in the world. And the mom's like, that cow is old and gonna die. And we don't actually get to see which one it is. They don't make a decision for us.
I mean, having it being a live action cow in the movie, I think does not work at all for me.
No, me neither. That was stupid.
But I would say, while I
understand, I think what they're
understand that.
saying, but I loved the puppetry. I thought it was so good. And
it was well done, and it gives another element of that, the storytelling being tiered.
Yeah.
Having the puppeteer, and they actually acknowledged the puppeteer.
Yeah, they do.
And I think that allows us again to feel like we're being transported from one sphere of view of this.
Yeah, one layer, one plane of storytelling to another. Yeah, that's true, because it adds another layer of reality there.
Yes.
Yeah, so I loved the puppets in the tour. I thought that they were great.
I thought they were good.
Those, and especially the shoes.
The shoes were excellent.
The Giants' shoes were awesome.
But I think that does let us, like you said, it does let us fill it out the rest of the way.
Yeah.
It did. It left plenty to the imagination.
Yes, absolutely.
I would say, in stark contrast, Paramount really showed that puppets can make it.
Really not great. Yeah, unearned.
Yeah, I don't think the puppetry.
Is that your unearned moment?
Sure. I'll.
Yeah.
I think the puppetry in specifically, it's not even the puppeteer's fault, but the way that the Milky White puppet was made.
Mm-hmm. It's a ghost puppet. It's a ghost cow.
The head had a lot of movement. They had a tail, but then its body was like sheets.
Yeah, and it was just like galloping weirdly.
And the way it galloped, it just like, it looked like it was just like a ghost flying. It did not look like any sort of movement. And if you're like, I mean, and they made that puppeteer like really serious. And like, and I'm like, if you're making it real, that cow needs to look like it's walking in a real way, not like ghost galloping. It was
really weird.
I'm like, if you're doing a puppet, you got to commit to whatever you're doing.
Yeah.
If you're doing it seriously, you got to do it seriously. If you you have to commit.
Mm-hmm.
And
all those puppets were like, it just was too many people on the stage. There were so many puppeteers, and it's another Chicago problem.
People come on with like 2,000 birds.
I know.
And I'm
it's like, oh my god, there's so many birds. Jeez, and there's so many people on the stage. It just like took up a lot of space that was already packed with all of this set and all of these other people. Another Chicago problem. You just like pack as many people as you can on the stage.
Yeah.
My unearned moment, I think, would be last midnight in the movie. Totally unearned because Rapunzel doesn't die.
Sure. Totally unearned.
Totally unearned. It doesn't make any sense for the witch to have this freak out, to like be that cold-blooded and trying to like get Jack, and because that's the whole thing. That she's like, when you're dead, you're dead, she says after the baker's wife dies.
Mm-hmm.
Is there no bringing her back? When you're dead, you're dead. And she's saying it about Rapunzel too. It's like she's moved on.
She is telling it to herself.
She is.
She's convincing herself.
And that line doesn't mean anything if Rapunzel's not dead.
No.
It just makes her seem kind of like mean and cruel, not heartbroken, not in horrible pain.
That's a really great moment in the
It's a really good moment in the show, and it's just ruined, unearned.
Unearned, yes.
I think that's been quite enough of that.
That's our.
Thanks for sticking through that.
No
more superlatives. I am tired. My
about.
gosh. Oh man, I think we've gone long enough. Thank you all for tuning in to Then a Moment. I'm Pavi Prochko, and nobody steals Into the Wigs. That's my drag show.
You got it. I don't think anyone wants it. But I'm Colin Funk. And remember, children won't listen, and children will listen.
That's right. All right. Thanks all.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Then a Moment, a Pavitas production project.
hosted by Colin Funk and Pavi Prochko. This podcast is produced by Chicago Podcast Studio. Our opening cartoon was created by Gloriu, and our theme song was composed by me, Pavi Prochko. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite listening platform. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok at Then a Moment Pod, all one word, for updates on new episodes and behind-the-scenes content. If you have any feedback, comments, concerns, or kudos, you can email us at thenamomentpod@gmail.com. Please rate and review us wherever you can. It would help us out a bunch. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.